Lightning tore across the sky as Eliza Marlowe ran through the mud, her breath ragged, her heart pounding harder than the storm itself. Behind her, the sound of hooves grew closer, and she knew that if she stopped even for a moment, everything she had left would be taken from her. Her dress, once a pale blue, was now soaked through and streaked with dirt, clinging to her skin as the rain fell without mercy. She did not look back. She could not afford to. Her stepfather, Edgar Whitlow, had drunk himself into a rage that night, the kind that came without warning and left bruises on more than skin. Eliza had learned long ago to read the signs, the way his voice dropped low before it rose into shouting, the way his hands curled into fists when the ale ran out. Tonight, when he had reached for her wrist and demanded she hand over the small locket her mother had left behind, something inside her had finally broken. She had pulled away, grabbed her cloak and run out into the night without a plan, without a destination, with nothing but the desperate need to be free of that house forever. The road stretched long and dark ahead of her, bordered by tall hedges that offered no shelter from the storm. She had no coin, no map, no notion of where she might find safety. All she knew was the direction away from her stepfather's house, and she followed it blindly, her shoes long since ruined by the mud, her lungs burning with every breath. The wind howled through the trees, and somewhere behind her, she thought she heard Edgar's voice calling her name, though she could not be certain if it was real, or only her fear giving shape to the storm. She stumbled over a root hidden beneath the water pooling on the road and fell hard onto her knees. For a moment, she considered staying there, letting the rain wash over her until she had no strength left to move. But the thought of Edgar finding her, of being dragged back to that house, gave her the will to rise once more. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heart to slow, and forced herself forward, following the road as it curved past a stretch of tall iron gates she had never noticed before. Beyond the gates stood a grand manor, its windows glowing with warm light against the darkness of the storm. Eliza had heard whispers of the estate from villagers who spoke of the reclusive duke who lived there, a man rarely seen beyond his own grounds, known more for his silence than for any scandal. She had never imagined she would find herself standing before his gates, drenched and desperate, with nowhere else to turn. But desperation did not allow for pride, and so she pushed through the gap in the iron bars where the gate had been left slightly open, and made her way up the long gravel drive toward the house. Her legs shook with every step, exhaustion pulling at her limbs like weights. The rain had not softened, and by the time she reached the wide stone steps leading to the entrance, her vision had begun to blur at the edges. She lifted a trembling hand to knock, but before her knuckles could meet the heavy wooden door, her strength finally gave out, and she collapsed onto the cold stone, the world around her fading into darkness. Inside the manor, Duke Nathaniel Ashford sat alone in his study, a glass of untouched brandy resting beside him as he stared into the fire. The storm outside matched the restlessness within him, a feeling that had followed him for years now. Ever since a betrayal he rarely allowed himself to think of had taught him to trust no one beyond his own household. He was not a cruel man, though many in society believed him cold. He simply preferred solitude to the shallow company of those who sought his title more than his character. A sharp knock at the front door pulled him from his thoughts, though it did not sound like a knock at all, more like something heavy striking wood. He frowned, setting down his glass, and listened as his butler, Mr. Hargrove, hurried through the hall to answer it. Moments later he heard raised voices, urgent and confused, and rose from his chair to investigate. He found his household staff gathered near the entrance, staring down at the crumpled form of a young woman lying unconscious on the stone steps, rain still pouring around her. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, her lips pale, her clothing soaked through and torn at the hem. Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, knelt beside her, pressing fingers to the woman's wrist to check for a pulse, relief flooding her expression when she found one. Nathaniel stood frozen for a moment, unaccustomed to such chaos within his carefully ordered household. His first instinct was caution. Strangers did not simply appear at his gates in the middle of a storm without reason, and reason, in his experience, often meant trouble. But as he looked down at the young woman, at the desperation still etched into her unconscious features, at the way her hand remained curled protectively around something hidden in her cloak, he felt something shift within him that he could not name. "Bring her inside," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Out of this rain." Mr. Hargrove hesitated. "Your Grace, we know nothing of her. It may be unwise to. She will die of exposure if we leave her out here debating wisdom," Nathaniel interrupted, already moving to help lift her carefully from the stone steps. "Send for the physician. Have a room prepared." His staff moved quickly then, following his orders despite their uncertainty. Nathaniel carried her himself into the warmth of the entrance hall, surprised by how light she felt in his arms, how fragile despite the strength it must have taken her to reach his door in such a state. He studied her face as Mrs. Bell hurried ahead to prepare a guest room, noting the faint bruise forming along her jaw, the exhaustion carved into every line of her expression even in unconsciousness. Whatever had brought her here, he thought, it had not been a gentle journey. The physician arrived within the hour, examining Eliza with careful hands while Nathaniel waited in the hallway outside, pacing in a manner entirely unlike himself. He told himself his concern was simple decency, the obligation any gentleman would feel toward a stranger in distress. Yet some quieter part of him recognized that his restlessness ran deeper than obligation alone. "She is exhausted and badly chilled," the physician reported, stepping out of the room. "There is bruising along her arm and jaw, likely from a fall, though I cannot say for certain. With rest and warmth, she should recover within a few days." Nathaniel nodded, absorbing the information with a stillness that masked the questions racing through his mind. Bruising from a fall, or from something else entirely. He did not voice his suspicion aloud, but it settled into him regardless, a quiet unease that refused to be dismissed. He instructed Mrs. Bell to see that the young woman had everything she required once she woke: dry clothing, warm food, whatever comfort could be offered. Then he returned to his study, though he found himself unable to focus on anything beyond the thought of the stranger sleeping beneath his roof, the mystery of her arrival settling over the house like the storm still raging outside. Hours passed before Eliza stirred, her eyes fluttering open to unfamiliar surroundings, a warm fire crackling in a hearth she did not recognize, soft blankets covering her in place of her ruined dress. For a moment, panic seized her, and she sat up too quickly, her head spinning with the effort. A young maid nearby startled at the movement and hurried to her side. "You're awake," the maid said gently. "Please, do not trouble yourself. You collapsed outside the manor last night. His Grace had you brought in out of the storm." Eliza's mind raced to piece together fragments of memory, the rain, the running, the gates she had stumbled through in desperation. She remembered nothing after reaching the front steps. A flush of humiliation crept over her at the thought of being carried inside like some helpless creature, dependent on the mercy of a stranger she had never met. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Ashford Manor," the maid replied. "Home of Duke Nathaniel Ashford. You are safe here, miss." Safe. The word felt foreign to Eliza, unfamiliar in a way that made her chest tighten. She had not felt safe in longer than she could remember, not since her mother had passed and left her to the mercy of a stepfather who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience to be controlled. She glanced down at her hands, relieved to find the small locket still clutched within her palm, the one possession she had managed to save from that house. The maid offered her water and a simple meal, which Eliza accepted gratefully, though her mind remained elsewhere, consumed with uncertainty about what would come next. She had no home to return to, no family who would take her in, no coin to secure lodging of her own. Whatever kindness this household had shown her, she knew it could not last forever. Strangers did not offer shelter without eventually expecting something in return, and she braced herself for the moment reality would catch up to the comfort she had been given. That moment came sooner than she expected. A soft knock sounded at the door, and before she could respond, it opened to reveal a tall figure standing in the doorway, dressed in dark, well-tailored clothing that spoke of wealth without excess. His expression was unreadable, guarded in a way that matched the quiet authority in his posture. Eliza recognized him instantly as the man the maid had spoken of, though nothing about him matched the reclusive, cold reputation she had heard whispered among villagers. "You are awake," he said simply, stepping into the room with measured steps. "I trust you are feeling better." Eliza straightened, despite her exhaustion, unwilling to appear more vulnerable than she already felt. "I am, Your Grace. I owe you my gratitude for your kindness, though I confess I do not fully understand it. Strangers rarely open their doors so freely." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Perhaps I am not as predictable as strangers assume." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, taking in the bruise along her jaw, the wariness still lingering behind her eyes despite her composed tone. Whatever question formed behind his expression, he did not voice it, not yet. Instead, he inclined his head toward her. "You are welcome to remain here until you have fully recovered," he said. "Afterward, we may discuss what circumstances led you to my gates in the middle of a storm." Eliza held his gaze, sensing that this man, despite his composed exterior, was not one easily deceived. Whatever story she offered him would need to hold up under a scrutiny she was not certain she could withstand. But for tonight at least, she was warm, she was fed, and she was, for the first time in longer than she could remember, safe from the storm that had chased her through the dark. As Nathaniel turned to leave the room, something in him hesitated at the threshold. He glanced back at her once more, at the quiet strength beneath her exhaustion, the way she had met his gaze without flinching despite everything she had clearly endured. He did not understand yet why her presence unsettled him so deeply, why the mystery of her arrival had already taken hold of his thoughts in a manner he had not experienced in years. He only knew, as he closed the door softly behind him, that the storm outside had brought more than rain to his doorstep that night. It had brought a question he was not yet ready to answer, and a stranger who, disheveled and unafraid, had already begun to unsettle the careful walls he had built around his heart. 3 days had passed since Eliza first opened her eyes within the walls of Ashford Manor, and in that time, a fragile routine had begun to take shape around her recovery. She spent her mornings resting beneath thick blankets while the household staff attended to her with a kindness she had not known in years, and her afternoons watching the rain finally clear from the windows of her borrowed room. The storm that had carried her here now nothing more than a distant memory of thunder and mud. Yet despite the comfort surrounding her, unease had settled deep within her chest and refused to leave. She was a guest in a stranger's home, dependent on charity she had not earned and could not repay, and she knew that such arrangements rarely lasted without complications. Sooner or later, the Duke would want answers, and she was not certain how much of the truth she was prepared to share. That reckoning arrived on the 4th morning, when Mrs. Bell entered her room with a simple gray dress folded over her arm, informing her that His Grace had requested her company in the drawing room, once she felt strong enough to rise. Eliza's stomach tightened at the news, though she forced herself to nod calmly, thanking the housekeeper for her continued kindness. She dressed slowly, her limbs still aching from exhaustion, and studied her reflection in the small mirror provided to her. The bruise along her jaw had faded to a dull yellow, less visible now than it had been, though the memory of how it came to be remained sharp and unwelcome in her mind. She smoothed the fabric of her borrowed dress and steadied her breathing before making her way downstairs, following the directions Mrs. Bell had given her through the quiet, elegant halls of the manor. The drawing room she entered was warm and softly lit, a fire crackling in the hearth despite the mild weather outside. Duke Nathaniel stood near the window, his posture straight, his expression composed in the same guarded manner she remembered from their first meeting. He turned as she entered, gesturing toward a chair near the fire. "Please, sit," he said. "You look far better than you did 4 nights ago, though I imagine that is not saying a great deal." A faint, unexpected smile tugged at Eliza's lips despite her nerves. "No, Your Grace, it is not. I owe you my thanks, truly. Few men would have opened their doors to a stranger in such a state. Few men would have left her outside to suffer the consequences of that assumption," he replied simply, taking a seat across from her. "I am not in the habit of turning away those in need, regardless of circumstance." Silence stretched between them for a moment, comfortable in a way Eliza had not expected, though she knew it would not last. Nathaniel studied her carefully, his dark eyes missing nothing, and she braced herself for the questions she knew must come. "I will not pretend I have no curiosity about how you came to be at my gates in the middle of a storm," he said finally, his tone even, neither accusing nor demanding. "But I will not press you for details you are unwilling to share. I only ask that whatever you tell me honestly." Eliza considered her response carefully, weighing how much truth she could bear to reveal without exposing herself entirely. "My mother passed some years ago," she began quietly. "Since then, I have lived under my stepfather's roof. He is not a kind man, Your Grace, and that night, circumstances between us grew beyond what I could bear. I left with nothing but the clothes I wore and no destination in mind. Your gates were simply where my strength gave out." She did not mention the details of Edgar's temper, the bruises that had accumulated over years of living beneath his control, the fear that had driven her into the storm without a plan. Some truths felt too raw to speak aloud to a stranger, however kind he had proven himself to be. Nathaniel's expression remained composed, though something flickered behind his eyes, a quiet understanding that suggested he grasped more of her unspoken meaning than she had intended to reveal. "I see," he said simply, not pressing further. "And you have no other family who might offer you shelter?" "None who would take me in," Eliza admitted. "My mother's relations are scattered, and none close enough to reach without funds I do not possess." A thoughtful silence settled over the room as Nathaniel considered her situation, his gaze drifting briefly to the fire before returning to her. My aunt, Lady Margaret, resides here at the manor, he said finally. Her health has declined in recent months, and she requires steady companionship, someone patient enough to manage her moods and attentive enough to see to her comfort. The position would provide you room, board, and a small wage, along with time to determine your next course while under my protection. Eliza's breath caught at the unexpected offer, gratitude and disbelief warring within her. You would offer me employment, Your Grace, despite knowing so little of me? I know enough, Nathaniel replied, his tone quiet but certain. I know that you walked through a storm rather than remain beneath a roof that caused you harm. That tells me more about your character than any letter of reference ever could. Eliza felt something unfamiliar rise within her chest at his words, a warmth she had not expected to find within these unfamiliar walls. She had come here expecting nothing beyond temporary shelter, and instead had been offered a path forward, however uncertain it remained. I accept, she said simply, and I thank you, truly, for this chance. Nathaniel inclined his head, though something in his expression suggested the matter was far from settled in his own mind. Lady Margaret can be difficult, he warned. She does not suffer fools, nor does she offer her trust easily. I will not pretend the position will be simple. I have managed difficult company before, Eliza replied, a hint of dry humor slipping into her tone despite herself. A brief flicker of amusement crossed Nathaniel's features, gone as quickly as it appeared, though Eliza noted it with quiet satisfaction. Whatever walls this man had built around himself, she sensed they were not entirely impenetrable. Mrs. Bell arrived shortly after to guide Eliza to Lady Margaret's chambers, offering a few words of gentle warning along the way regarding the elderly woman's sharp tongue and quick temper. Eliza listened carefully, grateful for the preparation, though nothing quite readied her for the reality of Lady Margaret herself. The older woman sat propped against a mountain of pillows in a grand four-poster bed, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes sharp despite the frailty evident in her frame. She studied Eliza with open scrutiny the moment she entered the room, her expression unimpressed. So you are the girl my nephew found half-drowned on his doorstep, Lady Margaret said, her voice carrying more strength than her appearance suggested. I confess I expected someone less pathetic-looking. Eliza held her ground despite the older woman's harsh tone, refusing to let the comment unsettle her. I apologize for disappointing your expectations, my lady. I was somewhat occupied surviving a storm at the time. Silence followed her response, and for a moment, Eliza feared she had overstepped. Then, unexpectedly, Lady Margaret let out a sharp bark of laughter, the sound surprising in its suddenness. Well, the older woman said, settling back against her pillows with something like approval softening her expression. At least you have spirit. The last companion Nathaniel hired wept within the hour and never returned. Perhaps you will last longer than a fortnight. Over the following hours, Eliza settled into her new role with cautious determination, learning the rhythms of Lady Margaret's needs, her preferences for tea steeped precisely 4 minutes, her insistence on having the curtains opened each morning regardless of weather, her sharp but not unkind commentary on everything from Eliza's posture to the state of her hair. Beneath the older woman's brusque exterior, Eliza began to sense a loneliness that mirrored her own, a longing for genuine company rather than dutiful obligation. As the days passed, Eliza found herself settling into the rhythm of life at Ashford Manor, with a steadiness she had not expected. Her mornings were spent attending to Lady Margaret, her afternoons occupied with small tasks around the household, and increasingly, her evenings found her crossing paths with Nathaniel in the quiet corridors of the manor, brief exchanges that grew slightly longer with each encounter. He was not the cold, distant figure the villagers had described. Beneath his guarded exterior, Eliza began to glimpse a man who thought carefully before speaking, who carried burdens he rarely voiced, whose rare smiles felt like small victories when she managed to coax them from him during their brief conversations. One evening, as she made her way through the library in search of a book to occupy Lady Margaret's restless mind, she found Nathaniel seated near the window, a book resting unread in his lap as he stared out at the darkening grounds. He glanced up as she entered, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. You have settled in well, he observed, setting his book aside. My aunt speaks of you with something close to approval, which is rare praise indeed. She has been kinder than I expected, Eliza admitted, moving toward the shelves, sharp-tongued, but not unkind. That describes most of my family, Nathaniel replied, a faint hint of dry humor coloring his tone. Eliza selected a book and turned to leave, but something in his expression gave her pause, a flicker of curiosity he seemed to be weighing whether to voice aloud. May I ask you something, Your Grace? He gestured for her to continue. Why did you truly allow me to stay? she asked. "You could have simply seen to my recovery and sent me on my way once I was well enough to travel. Instead, you offered me a position, a place within your household. Few men of your standing would extend such generosity to a stranger with no connections to offer in return." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the fire as though searching for the right words. "Perhaps because I once knew what it meant to be abandoned by those who should have protected me," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "I do not speak of it often, but I understand, more than you might expect, what it means to face the world with nothing but your own resolve to carry you forward." Eliza held his gaze, sensing the weight behind his words, the careful walls he had built around whatever pain lingered beneath them. She did not press him further, sensing instead that he had offered her more honesty in that moment than he had offered anyone in a long while. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding." He offered a small nod in response, and though neither spoke further of the matter, something had shifted between them in that quiet exchange, a thread of understanding drawn taut between two people who had both learned, in their own ways, what it meant to survive alone. As Eliza left the library that evening, she found herself reflecting on how quickly her circumstances had changed, from fleeing through a storm with nothing but fear driving her forward, to finding herself within these walls, cautiously building something that felt, for the first time in years, like the beginning of safety. She did not yet understand the depth of what was growing between herself and the quiet, guarded Duke who had taken her in, but she sensed, with a certainty she could not quite explain, that her life had been irrevocably changed the moment she stumbled through his gates. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever truths still remained hidden beneath the surface of their careful exchanges, Eliza allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to hope that perhaps she had found more than mere shelter within these walls. Perhaps, against every expectation, she had found the beginning of something far more lasting. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to the manor, a fact that sent a ripple of quiet tension through the household staff, long before Eliza understood its cause. She was attending to Lady Margaret when Mrs. Bell appeared at the door, her expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately raised Eliza's suspicion. "A gentleman has arrived asking for his grace," Mrs. Bell said. "Lord Colin Vane. He says his visit concerns matters of the neighboring estate boundaries, though I confess his manner suggests otherwise." Lady Margaret's expression tightened at the name, her sharp eyes narrowing with obvious distaste. "Colin Vane," she muttered. "That man has never visited this house without seeking some advantage for himself. Nathaniel would do well to remember that beneath his charm lies nothing but ambition." Eliza filed the warning away carefully, sensing it carried weight beyond simple family disapproval. She continued her duties throughout the morning, though she found herself listening for any sign of the visitor's departure, a curiosity she could not entirely explain settling over her. She caught her first glimpse of Lord Vane later that afternoon while crossing the entrance hall. A tall, well-dressed man with an easy smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He paused when he noticed her, his gaze sweeping over her with an assessing quality that made her uncomfortable in a way she could not immediately name. "And who might you be?" he asked, his tone smooth, almost too pleasant. "I was not aware Ashford had taken on new staff." "Eliza Marlowe," she replied evenly, refusing to let his scrutiny unsettle her. "Companion to Lady Margaret." Something flickered behind his eyes at her answer. Calculation replacing idle curiosity. "How interesting," he said. "Nathaniel has never been one to welcome strangers into his household so readily. You must be quite remarkable indeed." Before Eliza could respond, Nathaniel appeared from his study, his expression cooling noticeably at the sight of Vane standing so near to her. "Colin," he said, his voice carrying a warning edge beneath its politeness, "I believe our business is concluded." Vane offered a final lingering glance toward Eliza before turning back to Nathaniel with practiced ease. "Of course. Until next time, Your Grace." He inclined his head toward Eliza as he passed. "Miss Marlowe." Once the door closed behind their departing visitor, Nathaniel's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his expression remained troubled. "I apologize for his manner," he said. "Colin Vane has a talent for making everyone around him feel as though they are being measured for some future use." "He seemed quite interested in my presence here," Eliza observed carefully. "He is interested in anything that might grant him leverage," Nathaniel replied, his tone grim. "I would advise caution around him, should your paths cross again." Eliza nodded, filing the warning away alongside Lady Margaret's earlier caution, sensing that whatever quiet peace she had begun to find within these walls might soon face challenges from beyond them as well. Weeks passed at Ashford Manor, and with them came a rhythm to Eliza's days that she had never known before. one built not on fear but on purpose. She rose each morning to tend to Lady Margaret, whose sharp tongue had softened into something closer to fondness whenever Eliza entered the room, and her afternoons found her increasingly drawn into quiet moments with Nathaniel, conversations that stretched longer than either of them seemed to intend. Yet beneath the growing comfort of her new life, unease continued to stir, a reminder that Lord Colin Vane's visit had not been an isolated event, and Edgar Whitlow's shadow had not fully released its hold on her, no matter how far she had run. It was on a quiet afternoon, while Eliza sat with Lady Margaret in the small garden behind the manor, that the older woman broached a subject Eliza had not expected. "You watch him closely," Lady Margaret said, not looking up from the needlework resting in her lap. "My nephew, I mean. I have seen the way your gaze follows him when you believe no one is paying attention." Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks, caught off guard by the observation. "I hold him in great respect, my lady. He has shown me more kindness than I have known in years." "Respect," Lady Margaret repeated, a knowing edge entering her tone. "Yes, I imagine that is one word for it." She set aside her needlework, studying Eliza with an expression far more perceptive than her frail appearance suggested. "My nephew has not smiled so often in this house since before his mother passed. Whatever you have brought with you, girl, do not underestimate its effect on him." Eliza opened her mouth to protest, though the words felt hollow even as she considered them. She had noticed the shift in Nathaniel these past weeks, the way his guarded expression softened during their conversations, the rare laughter she had begun to draw from him during their evening exchanges in the library. She had told herself it meant nothing beyond simple friendship, yet Lady Margaret's words settled uncomfortably close to feelings Eliza had not allowed herself to fully examine. "I would not wish to overstep my position," Eliza said finally, choosing her words with care. "I am his aunt's companion, nothing more. It would be foolish of me to imagine anything beyond that." Lady Margaret's expression softened unexpectedly, a rare gentleness replacing her usual sharpness. "Foolish or not, the heart rarely concerns itself with what is wise. I have watched enough of life to know that connection such as what grows between you and my nephew is rare, and rarer still when it is genuine rather than born of ambition or convenience. Do not dismiss it simply because it frightens you." Eliza said nothing further, though Lady Margaret's words lingered with her long after their conversation ended, following her through the quiet corridors of the manor as she returned to her own chambers that evening. That night, unable to settle her restless thoughts, Eliza made her way to the library, seeking the comfort of its quiet shelves rather than the confines of her room. She found Nathaniel there once more, as she often did during these late hours, seated near the fire with a book resting unread in his lap, his gaze fixed instead on the flickering flames before him. He glanced up as she entered, offering a small, familiar smile that had become customary between them during these evening encounters. "Unable to sleep again?" he asked. "My mind has been restless," Eliza admitted, settling into the chair across from him without waiting for invitation, a familiarity that had grown naturally between them over the past weeks. Lady Margaret has a talent for planting thoughts that refuse to leave once spoken. Nathaniel's brow lifted with curiosity. "And what thoughts has she planted this time?" Eliza hesitated, uncertain how much honesty she was prepared to offer. "She spoke of change," she said carefully, "of how circumstances can shift a household in ways no one anticipates." Something in Nathaniel's expression shifted, a quiet understanding passing behind his eyes that suggested he grasped more of her meaning than she had intended to reveal. "My aunt rarely speaks without purpose," he said. "Whatever she meant to convey, I imagine it carries some truth." Silence settled between them, comfortable despite its weight, and Eliza found herself studying his face in the firelight, the sharp lines of his jaw softened by the warm glow, the careful composure he maintained around others noticeably absent in these quiet moments they now shared. She wondered, not for the first time, what burdens he carried beneath his guarded exterior, what betrayal he had alluded to weeks earlier, without ever fully explaining. "May I ask you something personal?" she said finally, her curiosity overcoming her usual restraint. Nathaniel inclined his head, granting permission. "You once mentioned understanding what it meant to be abandoned by those who should have protected you," Eliza said carefully. "I have wondered since then what you meant, though I have not wished to press you for details you were unwilling to share." Nathaniel's expression grew distant for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the fire as though searching for words long buried beneath careful composure. "My father passed when I was young," he began slowly. "My mother remarried soon after, to a man who saw my title as nothing more than a means to secure his own ambitions. He was not cruel in the way some men are, not through violence, but through neglect and manipulation. using my position to further his own standing, while offering me nothing resembling genuine care. Eliza listened quietly, sensing the weight behind each carefully chosen word, the restraint he exercised even now in describing pain that clearly still lingered. When I came of age and assumed my title fully, I severed ties with him, Nathaniel continued. My mother chose to remain at his side rather than acknowledge the harm he had caused. I have not spoken with either of them in nearly a decade. He paused, his gaze meeting Eliza's directly for the first time since he had begun speaking. It taught me, perhaps too thoroughly, to guard myself against those who might seek to use my position rather than value my character. That is why you were so quick to distrust Lord Vane, Eliza said softly, pieces of understanding falling into place. Colin has ambitions of his own, Nathaniel confirmed. He has sought advantageous connections through marriage for years now, and I fear my household and those within it may have recently caught his attention for reasons beyond simple curiosity. A chill settled over Eliza at his words, an unease she had not fully articulated until now. You believe he intends something regarding me? I do not know his intentions with certainty, Nathaniel admitted, but men like Colin rarely show interest without purpose behind it. I would ask that you remain cautious should he seek you out again. Eliza nodded, though her thoughts had already begun turning toward the deeper implication behind his warning, the reminder that whatever safety she had found within these walls remained fragile, vulnerable to forces beyond her control. Thank you, she said quietly, for trusting me with this. I understand now why guarding your heart has become such instinct for you. Nathaniel's expression softened at her words, something unspoken passing between them in the quiet warmth of the firelit room. Perhaps, he said slowly, instinct is not always accurate. There are exceptions to every guard a man builds around himself, however carefully constructed. Eliza's breath caught at the implication behind his words, her heart quickening despite her attempt to remain composed. She held his gaze, uncertain how to respond to the vulnerability he had just offered her, a vulnerability she suspected he rarely extended to anyone. Before either could voice more, however, the moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching the library, and Mrs. Bell appeared in the doorway, her expression tight with concern. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, she said quickly. A messenger has arrived with urgent news. Lady Margaret has taken ill, quite suddenly. I believe you should come at once. The warmth of the moment shattered instantly, replaced by immediate alarm, as both Eliza and Nathaniel rose from their chairs and hurried toward Lady Margaret's chambers. They found the elderly woman pale and struggling for breath, her maid attending to her with obvious distress while awaiting the physician's arrival. Eliza moved quickly to Lady Margaret's side, taking her hand gently as she had done countless times over the past weeks, offering what comfort she could while Nathaniel dispatched further instructions to his staff. The older woman's grip tightened weakly around Eliza's fingers, her breathing labored but steady enough to offer some reassurance. You are frightening us all, my lady, Eliza said softly, forcing calm into her voice despite the fear tightening her own chest. You must fight through this. Who else would keep me properly humbled with your sharp observations? A faint, weak smile touched Lady Margaret's lips despite her evident discomfort. Someone must, she murmured, keep you both from wasting more time than you already have. The physician arrived shortly after, examining Lady Margaret with careful attention, while Nathaniel and Eliza waited anxiously outside her chambers, the earlier warmth of their conversation now overshadowed by fear for the woman who had become dear to them both. Her heart is weaker than we had hoped, the physician explained once his examination concluded. She requires complete rest and careful attention over the coming weeks. With proper care, she may yet recover her strength, though I cannot offer certainty. Nathaniel absorbed the news with visible strain, his composed exterior cracking slightly under the weight of concern for his aunt. Eliza, sensing his distress, reached out instinctively to touch his arm, offering silent comfort in place of empty reassurances neither of them could truly believe. We will see her through this, Eliza said quietly. Together. Nathaniel's gaze met hers, gratitude and something deeper passing behind his eyes as he nodded, accepting the comfort she offered without hesitation. Whatever uncertainty lingered between them regarding the future, this moment made clear that they had become, in the span of only a few short weeks, far more than strangers sharing the same roof. They would face whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from Lady Margaret's fragile health, Lord Vane's uncertain intentions, or the deeper questions still lingering unspoken between them, together, bound now by a connection neither of them could deny, however much caution urged them otherwise. Over the days that followed, Eliza barely left Lady Margaret's side, taking on the role of primary caretaker, alongside the physician's regular visits. She read to the older woman during her waking hours, adjusted her pillows through restless nights, and coaxed her into taking the broth and medicine she often refused from others. Slowly, gradually, color began to return to Lady Margaret's cheeks, and her sharp wit resurfaced along with her strength, much to the relief of the entire household. Nathaniel, too, spent more time within his aunt's chambers than his duties as Duke typically allowed, often finding excuses to remain nearby while Eliza tended to her care. Their earlier conversation in the library remained unspoken between them during these anxious days, both too consumed with concern for Lady Margaret to revisit the vulnerability they had briefly shared. Yet the connection forged in that quiet moment lingered beneath the surface, evident in the way their eyes met across the room, in the quiet understanding that passed between them without need for words. One evening, as Lady Margaret finally slept peacefully for the first time since her collapse, Eliza stepped out into the corridor to find Nathaniel waiting there, leaning against the wall with visible exhaustion etched into his features. "She is improving," Eliza said softly, offering what reassurance she could. The physician seemed encouraged by her progress today. "Thanks to your care," Nathaniel replied, his voice heavy with gratitude he did not attempt to hide. "I do not know how I would have managed these past days without you, Eliza." The use of her given name, rather than the more formal address he typically favored, sent a small flutter through Eliza's chest. "You give me too much credit," she said, though warmth colored her tone despite her attempt at modesty. "Your aunt's strength carried her through this, not my efforts alone." Nathaniel shook his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You underestimate yourself," he said quietly. "You have brought more to this household in these past weeks than you realize. Not only to my aunt's recovery, but to—" He paused, seeming to reconsider his words before continuing more carefully. "To all of us." Eliza held his gaze, sensing the weight behind his careful pause, the deeper meaning he seemed hesitant to voice fully. Before she could respond, however, a servant approached with a letter for Nathaniel, interrupting the moment with news that pulled his attention away. He read the letter with a frown deepening across his features, his earlier warmth replaced by evident concern. "It seems Lord Vane has requested another meeting," he said, folding the letter with visible reluctance. "He claims the matter concerns boundary disputes once more, though I suspect his true purpose lies elsewhere." "You believe he intends to ask about me again?" Eliza said, understanding settling uncomfortably within her. "I intend to ensure he receives no encouragement in that regard," Nathaniel replied firmly, though worry remained evident beneath his resolve. "Colin does not easily abandon pursuits he has set his mind toward. I would ask that you remain within the manor grounds until this matter resolves itself, for your own safety." Eliza nodded, though unease settled over her at the reminder that threats still lingered beyond these walls, waiting patiently for opportunity. She thought of Edgar as well, of the stepfather she had fled weeks earlier, wondering whether he too might eventually seek to reclaim what he considered his to control. She had not yet told Nathaniel the full truth of her circumstances, the depth of what she had endured beneath Edgar's roof, and she wondered how much longer she could continue keeping such truths hidden from a man who had shown her nothing but honesty and care in return. That night, as she prepared for sleep within her own chambers, Eliza found herself standing before the small mirror, studying her reflection with a critical eye. The bruises Edgar had left upon her had long since faded, but the fear he had instilled remained, buried beneath the fragile peace she had begun to build within these walls. She touched the locket resting against her collarbone, the one possession she had carried with her through the storm, and thought of her mother, of the strength that woman had shown until her final days despite circumstances that offered little comfort. She would not allow fear to define her future any longer, she decided. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from Lord Vane's ambitions or Edgar's inevitable return, she would face them with the same resolve that had carried her through the storm that first brought her to Ashford Manor. She was no longer the frightened girl who had collapsed upon these steps weeks earlier. She had found purpose here, connection, and perhaps, though she barely allowed herself the thought, something resembling love beginning to take root within a heart she had long guarded against such vulnerability. Whatever came next, she would face it unafraid. The following morning, Eliza rose early, drawn by habit to check on Lady Margaret before the older woman had even woken. She found the household already stirring with unusual activity, servants moving briskly through the halls with expressions of quiet urgency. Curious, she made her way toward the entrance, where she found Nathaniel speaking in low, clipped tones with Mr. Hargrove near the front door. "What has happened?" Eliza asked, approaching carefully. Nathaniel turned toward her, his expression tight with restrained frustration. Colin Vane arrived at first light, unannounced, insisting on speaking with me regarding matters he refused to specify to my staff. I have sent him away for now, but he made it clear he does not intend to be dismissed so easily. Did he mention me? Eliza asked, her earlier unease returning with sharper clarity. He asked after your welfare, Nathaniel admitted reluctantly, framed as polite concern, though I recognized it for the probing it truly was. I told him you were recovering well under my aunt's care and left it at that. Eliza absorbed this news with a steadying breath, refusing to let fear overtake the calm she had worked to cultivate. Perhaps it would be wise for me to understand more clearly what threat he actually poses, she said. You have warned me of his ambitions, but I confess I do not fully understand what he might hope to gain through pursuing someone in my position. Nathaniel considered her question carefully before answering. Colin has spent years attempting to secure his standing through advantageous marriage, yet his reputation has made such prospects increasingly difficult to arrange among families of consequence. A companion within my household, someone he perceives as vulnerable and without protection, may seem to him an easier target for manipulation, particularly if he believes such a connection might grant him leverage over my own affairs. The implication settled uncomfortably over Eliza, understanding sharpening into resolve rather than fear. Then he will find me a poor target for manipulation, she said firmly. I have survived worse than a man's calculated ambitions, Your Grace. I do not intend to become anyone's pawn again. Something like admiration flickered across Nathaniel's features at her declaration, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly despite the tension of the morning. No, he agreed quietly. I do not believe you will. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Lady Margaret's bell ringing from upstairs, summoning Eliza back to her duties. As she turned to go, Nathaniel reached out, briefly touching her arm to halt her departure. Whatever comes, he said, his voice low and sincere, know that you are not facing it alone. Not any longer. Eliza held his gaze a moment longer than necessary, warmth spreading through her chest, despite the uncertainty of the days ahead. Nor are you, Your Grace, she replied softly, before making her way upstairs, carrying his words with her like a quiet promise neither of them had yet dared to speak aloud in full. The knock at the front door came without warning on a gray afternoon, sharp and demanding in a way that immediately set the household on edge. Eliza was in the garden with Lady Margaret, now well enough to sit outside for short periods, when Mrs. Bell appeared with unmistakable alarm written across her face. There is a man at the door, she said, hurrying toward them. He claims to be your stepfather, miss. He is demanding to see you, and he refuses to leave until he does. Eliza's blood ran cold, every fragile sense of safety she had built over the past weeks, threatening to shatter at once. She had known, somewhere in the back of her mind, that this moment might come, yet knowing had done nothing to prepare her for the reality of Edgar Whitlow standing once again within reach of her life. Do not go to him, Lady Margaret said sharply, gripping Eliza's hand with surprising strength. Nathaniel must be informed immediately. But it was already too late for such caution. Nathaniel appeared at the garden entrance moments later, his expression thunderous, having clearly already encountered the unwelcome visitor himself. He is in my entrance hall, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Demanding your return, Eliza, and threatening consequences should I refuse to hand you over. Eliza rose on unsteady legs, torn between the instinct to flee and the fierce resolve that had been building within her these past weeks. She would not run again, she decided. She would not allow Edgar to chase her through another storm, to reduce her once more to the frightened girl who had collapsed upon these very grounds months ago. I will face him, she said, steadying her voice despite the fear coiling tight within her chest. You do not have to, Nathaniel said immediately, concern sharpening his tone. I can have him removed from the property without you ever needing to see him. No, Eliza replied firmly. I have hidden from him long enough. Whatever he intends to say, I would rather hear it directly than wonder what threats linger unspoken. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between respecting her wishes and his own protective instincts. Finally he nodded, though his jaw remained tight with restrained tension. Then I will remain beside you, he said. He will not intimidate you while I stand witness. Together they made their way toward the entrance hall, where Edgar Whitlow stood waiting, his expression twisted into something between false concern and barely restrained fury. He had dressed carefully for the occasion, his coat neat despite the wear evident at its edges, an attempt at respectability that did little to mask the coldness in his eyes. Eliza, he said, his voice carrying false warmth the moment he spotted her. Thank goodness you are safe. I have been searching for you for weeks, sick with worry over what might have become of you. You need not pretend concern you never felt. Eliza replied evenly, refusing to let old fear tremble through her voice. I left because remaining under your roof had become unbearable. You know this well enough. Edgar's expression flickered, false warmth giving way briefly to irritation before he composed himself once more. You misunderstand the situation, my dear. Whatever occurred between us was simply a misunderstanding born of grief and difficult circumstance. I have come to bring you home, where you belong. I belong nowhere near you, Eliza said, her voice growing stronger with each word. And I will not be returning to that house, regardless of what claims you make here today. Edgar's gaze shifted toward Nathaniel, calculation replacing his earlier facade. Your Grace, I understand you have taken pity on my stepdaughter, offering her shelter during a difficult time. I appreciate your generosity, truly, but she is my responsibility, and family matters ought to remain within the family. I must insist she return with me today. She is not property to be reclaimed, Nathaniel replied, his voice cold and controlled despite the fury evident beneath his composed exterior. Miss Marlowe has chosen to remain under my protection, and I will honor that choice. You have no authority here, and I would advise you to leave before I have you escorted from my property. Edgar's expression darkened, false pleasantness abandoned entirely, as his true nature surfaced. You do not understand what you are meddling in, Your Grace. Perhaps you believe yourself noble for offering shelter to a stranger, but you know nothing of what she truly is. What accusations might follow her should certain truths come to light? What truths do you imagine you possess? Nathaniel demanded, stepping forward with barely restrained anger. Theft, Edgar said simply, a cruel satisfaction entering his tone as he watched the words land. She took items from my household when she fled, items of value that belonged to her late mother's estate, rightfully mine to manage as her guardian. I could bring charges against her, ruin whatever reputation she hopes to build within your household, unless she returns with me now and puts an end to this foolishness. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face at the accusation, fury and fear warring within her chest. The only item I took was my mother's locket, she said, her voice trembling despite her attempt at control. Nothing more. You have no claim to accuse me of theft. A locket that carries considerable value, Edgar replied smoothly, along with other items you conveniently forget to mention. The magistrate would find my account quite compelling, I imagine, particularly given your history of instability since your mother's passing. Nathaniel's expression had grown murderous throughout this exchange, his hands curling into fists at his sides as he struggled to maintain composure. You would fabricate accusations against her to force her return, he said, disgust evident in every word. I have met men of low character before, Whitlow, but few as contemptible as what stands before me now. Careful, Your Grace, Edgar warned, though uncertainty flickered briefly behind his bravado at Nathaniel's evident fury. Scandal touches everyone it brushes against, regardless of title or standing. Your reputation would suffer greatly should whispers begin circulating about the company you keep. Then let them whisper, Nathaniel replied without hesitation. I fear no scandal born of protecting someone from a man such as you. Leave my property immediately, or I will have you removed by force, and I promise you, the magistrate will hear far more compelling accounts of your own conduct than whatever fabrication you intend to spin against Miss Marlowe. Edgar's composure finally cracked entirely, fury replacing his earlier calculation. He took a threatening step toward Eliza, only to find Nathaniel immediately positioning himself between them, his presence an unmistakable barrier neither words nor intimidation could breach. This is not finished, Edgar spat, backing away as two of Nathaniel's footmen approached at his silent signal. You will regret this interference, Your Grace, mark my words. I regret nothing where her safety is concerned, Nathaniel replied coldly, watching as the footman escorted Edgar firmly toward the door. Leave, and do not return. Should you attempt to contact Miss Marlowe again, through any means, I will ensure the full weight of consequence falls upon you. Edgar cast one final venomous glance toward Eliza before being escorted from the property, his threats trailing behind him even as the heavy door closed firmly against his departure. Silence fell over the entrance hall in the aftermath, broken only by Eliza's unsteady breathing as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, leaving trembling exhaustion in its place. Nathaniel turned toward her immediately, concern replacing the fury that had dominated his expression moments before. Are you well? He asked, his voice gentler now, though tension remained evident in every line of his posture. I am, Eliza managed, though her voice shook despite her attempt at composure. Thank you for standing beside me. I do not know that I could have faced him alone. You would not have needed to, Nathaniel replied firmly. Not as long as I have breath to stand between you and harm. The sincerity behind his words settled deep within Eliza's chest, warmth spreading despite the lingering fear from Edgar's threats. She studied his face, the fierce protectiveness still evident in his expression, and felt something shift within her, a certainty she had been resisting acknowledging fully until this very moment. His accusations, she said quietly. Do you believe them? Not for a moment, Nathaniel replied without hesitation. I have watched you these past weeks, Eliza. I know your character well enough to recognize a fabrication when I hear one. Whatever he claims, it carries no weight against the truth of who you are. Relief flooded through her at his unwavering certainty, gratitude mixing with something deeper that she no longer felt capable of denying. Thank you, she said softly, for believing in me. Nathaniel reached out, gently taking her hand within his own, a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. I believe in far more than that, he said quietly, though I suspect now is not the moment to speak fully of everything I have come to feel these past weeks. Eliza's heart raced at his words, hope and uncertainty tangled together within her chest. Whatever threat Edgar still posed, whatever scandal his fabricated accusations might yet stir within society, she found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, unafraid to face whatever came next, as long as Nathaniel remained beside her. But even as comfort settled over the manor once more, both of them understood that Edgar's departure marked only the beginning of trouble yet to come. His threats had not been idle, and the whispers he intended to spread would soon reach ears far beyond the walls of Ashford Manor, threatening to unravel everything Eliza had worked so carefully to rebuild. That evening, Lady Margaret summoned both Eliza and Nathaniel to her chambers, having heard a full account of the confrontation from Mrs. Bell within the hour of its occurrence. She sat propped against her pillows, her expression uncharacteristically grave as she studied them both. Edgar Whitlow is not a man who abandons a scheme simply because his first attempt failed, she said without preamble. You have made a dangerous enemy today, Eliza, and I fear his threats regarding scandal were not merely empty words meant to frighten you into compliance. What would you have us do? Nathaniel asked, seating himself near his aunt's bedside. I will not send her away simply to avoid whatever gossip he intends to spread. I did not suggest such a thing, Lady Margaret replied sharply. I only caution you both to prepare yourselves. Whatever falsehoods he intends to circulate, they will find eager ears among those who already question why you have taken a stranger into your household with such evident favor. Eliza's stomach twisted at the reminder that their growing connection had not gone unnoticed, even within the relative privacy of the manor. I would not wish to bring hardship upon this household through my presence, she said quietly. Perhaps it would be wiser for me to seek employment elsewhere, somewhere Edgar's reach cannot follow so easily. Absolutely not, Nathaniel said immediately, his tone leaving no room for argument. Running from this threat would only confirm whatever lies he intends to spread. We will face this together, as we faced him this afternoon. Lady Margaret's expression softened slightly at her nephew's fierce declaration, though concern remained evident in the lines of her weathered face. There is also the matter of Colin Vane to consider, she added. Should he learn of Edgar's accusations, I have little doubt he would seize the opportunity to further complicate matters, whether through genuine belief in the rumors or simple opportunism. I have already considered that possibility, Nathaniel admitted grimly. Colin has shown too keen an interest in Eliza's presence here to ignore such convenient scandal, should it reach him. The weight of their combined concerns settled heavily over the room, the earlier relief of Edgar's departure giving way to renewed unease about what challenges still lay ahead. Eliza reached instinctively for the locket resting against her collarbone, drawing what comfort she could from the small connection to her mother's memory. Whatever comes, she said finally, steadying her resolve, I would rather face it honestly than hide from it in fear. I have spent enough of my life running from difficulty. I do not intend to start again now. Nathaniel's gaze met hers with evident pride, and something warmer still beneath it. Then we will face it together, he said firmly, and let whoever doubts your character learn precisely how mistaken they are. Lady Margaret watched the exchange between them with a knowing look, though she said nothing further on the matter that evening, content instead to let the quiet resolve building between her nephew and his companion speak for itself. As Eliza finally retired to her chambers that night, exhaustion from the day's confrontation settling heavily over her, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come since that stormy night months ago. From a frightened girl fleeing through the darkness, to a woman prepared to stand firm against whatever threats still awaited her. She did not yet know how quickly Edgar's poison would spread through society's careful circles, nor how deeply Colin Vane's ambitions would intertwine with her stepfather's fabricated accusations in the days to come. But as she settled beneath the warmth of her blankets that night, She allowed herself a rare moment of quiet confidence, trusting that whatever storm approached next, she would not face it alone. Sleep did not come easily that night, though Eliza's thoughts remained steadier than they had any right to be after such a confrontation. She thought of Nathaniel's hand closing gently around hers in the entrance hall, of the fierce certainty in his voice as he had dismissed Edgar's threats without hesitation. Whatever fear Edgar had once held over her had begun to lose its grip these past weeks, replaced gradually by a strength she had not known she possessed until circumstance demanded she find it. Outside her window, the grounds of Ashford Manor lay quiet beneath a clearing sky, the storm of Edgar's visit having passed as swiftly as it arrived, though its consequences, she suspected, had only just begun to take root. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, whispered rumors and calculated schemes she could not yet fully anticipate. But tonight, within these walls that had become more of a home than any she had known before, Eliza allowed herself to rest, comforted by the knowledge that she no longer faced the world alone. Within a fortnight, the rumors Edgar Whitlow had threatened to spread began circulating through society with a speed that left Eliza breathless with dread. She first heard whispers of it from Mrs. Bell, who returned from the village market with troubled news that gossip had already reached the shops and taverns, twisted tales of a scheming young woman who had insinuated herself into the Duke's household through deception and false claims of victimhood. "They say you fabricated stories of mistreatment to gain his sympathy," Mrs. Bell reported reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable delivering such news. "Some claim you stole from your stepfather's household before fleeing, using your wounds, whatever their true origin, to manipulate his grace's compassion." Eliza felt sick at the deliberate cruelty behind such fabrications, the way Edgar had twisted every truth of her suffering into a weapon aimed squarely at destroying her character. "None of it is true," she said, though the assurance felt hollow against the weight of rumors already spreading beyond her control. "I know that, miss," Mrs. Bell replied gently. "We all do, having witnessed your character these past weeks. But I fear such assurances carry little weight against gossip already taking root among those who do not know you as we do." The situation grew more complicated within days, when Nathaniel returned from a visit to town with grim news of his own. "Colin Vane has been busy," he reported, his expression tight with barely restrained fury. "He has taken to confirming Edgar's accusations wherever he finds willing ears, adding his own embellishments regarding your character and intentions. I believe he hopes to force a scandal severe enough that I will have no choice but to distance myself from you, leaving you vulnerable to whatever scheme he intends next." Eliza absorbed this news with a sinking heart, understanding now the full scope of the trap closing around her. "What can we do?" she asked, frustration mixing with fear at circumstances so thoroughly beyond her control. "We continue as we have," Nathaniel replied firmly. "I will not allow rumor and manipulation to dictate my choices, nor will I permit them to drive you from this household. Whatever whispers circulate, the truth remains unchanged." Despite his resolve, the following weeks proved increasingly difficult for them both. Invitations that had once arrived regularly for Nathaniel now grew sparse, and those that did arrive came accompanied by pointed questions regarding the young woman residing within his household. Eliza found herself the subject of scrutiny whenever she accompanied Lady Margaret on rare outings into town, whispered conversations falling silent as she passed, curious and often unkind glances following her through streets that had once felt welcoming. The strain began to show on Nathaniel as well, though he never once suggested Eliza leave the household to ease the pressure mounting against his reputation. Instead, his protectiveness only sharpened, his patience with society's judgment growing thinner with each fresh rumor that reached his ears. Matters came to a head at a social gathering hosted by one of Nathaniel's longtime acquaintances, an event he had initially considered declining given the circulating gossip, though Lady Margaret had insisted attendance would demonstrate strength rather than weakness in the face of scandal. "Hiding away only confirms suspicion," she had argued firmly. "Attend, hold your head high, and let them see for themselves that whatever rumors circulate carry no truth worth their attention." Reluctantly, Nathaniel agreed, and Eliza found herself accompanying the family to the gathering, dressed in a borrowed gown of soft green that Lady Margaret had insisted suited her far better than anything Eliza would have chosen for herself. Despite the older woman's encouragement, Eliza's nerves remained taut as they entered the crowded ballroom, painfully aware of the curious glances that followed their arrival. The evening progressed with careful civility at first, though Eliza noticed the whispered conversations that followed in her wake, the way certain guests seemed to deliberately avoid engaging with her directly, their polite smiles carrying an edge of judgment barely concealed beneath practiced manners. She endured it with as much composure as she could summon, remaining close to Lady Margaret's side while Nathaniel attended to obligatory conversations with fellow gentlemen across the room. It was during a brief moment of separation that Colin Vane approached her directly, his expression carrying false pleasantness that did little to mask the calculation beneath it. "Miss Marlowe," he said smoothly, "how fortunate to find you here this evening. I confess I wondered whether recent circumstances might have made such gatherings uncomfortable for you." "I manage well enough, Lord Vane," Eliza replied coolly, refusing to grant him the reaction he clearly sought. "Admirable resilience," he continued, his tone carrying subtle mockery beneath its surface courtesy, "though I imagine it grows tiresome, defending oneself against such persistent rumor. Perhaps it would ease matters considerably if you were to seek employment elsewhere, somewhere your presence might not continue causing such difficulty for the Duke's reputation." Eliza's temper flared despite her attempt at composure, recognizing the thinly veiled threat behind his suggestion. "I do not intend to abandon my position simply to satisfy those seeking to manufacture scandal where none exists," she replied firmly. "Whatever your purpose in circulating these falsehoods, Lord Vane, I would advise you to reconsider your approach." Something flickered behind Vane's eyes at her direct challenge, irritation replacing his earlier smoothness. "You mistake my intentions, Miss Marlowe. I merely offer practical counsel, given the circumstances. Continue as you are, and I fear the consequences may prove considerably more severe than mere gossip." Before Eliza could respond further, Nathaniel appeared at her side, his expression darkening the moment he recognized the tension of their exchange. "Colin," he said, his voice carrying unmistakable warning, "I believe you have said quite enough." Vane's composure returned instantly, though something calculating remained behind his practiced smile. "Merely offering friendly counsel, Ashford, nothing more. Though I do wonder how much longer you intend to jeopardize your own standing over a companion of such uncertain reputation." "Her reputation is not uncertain," Nathaniel replied coldly, his patience clearly reaching its limit. "It has been deliberately maligned by men more concerned with their own ambitions than with honesty or decency. I would advise you to cease this campaign immediately, Colin, before I am forced to address it through less diplomatic means." The exchange had drawn attention from nearby guests, conversations quieting as onlookers turned to observe the mounting tension between the two men. Vane, sensing the shifting attention, offered a final thin smile before inclining his head. "Of course, Your Grace. I would not wish to cause further difficulty this evening." He glanced once more toward Eliza before departing. "Miss Marlowe, I do hope circumstances improve for you." Once he had gone, Nathaniel turned toward Eliza, concern replacing the anger that had dominated his expression moments before. "Are you well?" he asked quietly. "I apologize for his behavior. I should have anticipated he might seek you out this evening." "I am well enough," Eliza replied, though her hands trembled slightly with the aftermath of the confrontation. "His threats grow bolder, though. I fear he intends something beyond mere gossip." Nathaniel's expression grew grim at her observation. "I share that concern," he admitted. "Whatever scheme he pursues, I do not believe rumor alone satisfies his ambitions. We must remain vigilant." The remainder of the evening passed with careful tension, both of them aware of the curious eyes still following their every interaction, the whispered conversations that continued despite Nathaniel's earlier confrontation with Vane. By the time they finally departed for home, exhaustion had settled deeply over Eliza, the strain of maintaining composure throughout the evening leaving her drained in ways that extended far beyond simple physical tiredness. The following days brought little relief from the mounting pressure surrounding them. Nathaniel received several pointed letters from acquaintances questioning his judgment, some even suggesting he distance himself from Eliza entirely to preserve his standing among society's more influential circles. He dismissed each such suggestion without hesitation, though the constant pressure clearly weighed upon him, evident in the tension that had begun creeping into his usually composed demeanor. Eliza, for her part, struggled with guilt over the difficulty her presence had brought upon the household that had shown her nothing but kindness. She found herself withdrawing slightly, uncertain whether her continued presence caused more harm than the comfort and purpose she had found within these walls. Lady Margaret, ever perceptive, noticed the shift in Eliza's demeanor and addressed it directly one afternoon as they sat together in the garden, the older woman's health continuing its steady improvement despite the tension surrounding the household. "You are considering leaving," Lady Margaret observed, not phrasing it as a question. "I can see it in the way you have begun distancing yourself these past days." Eliza did not deny the accusation, too exhausted to maintain pretense before someone who had come to know her so well. "I have brought nothing but difficulty to this household," she admitted quietly. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if I removed myself from the situation entirely, before matters grow worse. And do you believe leaving would resolve anything? Lady Margaret asked pointedly. Edgar's lies would remain unanswered, Colin's ambitions unchecked, and my nephew's heart, which you have clearly claimed whether either of you has fully acknowledged it, left broken in your absence. Running away has never solved anything, child. It only delays the inevitable confrontation that must eventually occur. The older woman's words struck deep, echoing sentiments Eliza had been reluctant to fully examine within herself. I do not wish to cause him further hardship, she said softly. The hardship exists regardless of your presence or absence, Lady Margaret replied firmly. The only question that remains is whether you intend to face it beside him, or leave him to fight this battle alone while you retreat into whatever safety you imagine exists elsewhere. I do not believe, having witnessed your resolve these past months, that retreat suits your character at all. Eliza absorbed the older woman's words carefully, recognizing the truth within them despite her lingering guilt. She thought of Edgar's cruel manipulation, of Colin Vane's calculated threats, of Nathaniel's unwavering defense despite the cost to his own reputation. Running now would not undo the damage already inflicted upon his standing, nor would it protect him from whatever further schemes Vane and Edgar intended to pursue. It would only leave her feeling, once again, like the frightened girl fleeing through the storm, rather than the woman she had become within these walls. You are right, she said finally, resolve hardening within her chest. I will not run. Whatever comes next, I intend to face it, beside him, until this matter finds its resolution. Lady Margaret's expression softened into something like approval, her sharp eyes carrying unmistakable warmth despite her usual brusque manner. Good, she said simply, because I suspect matters are about to come to a head rather more swiftly than any of us anticipated. Her words proved prophetic sooner than Eliza expected. That very evening, a letter arrived at Ashford Manor bearing news that would force the confrontation Lady Margaret had predicted, threatening to expose every carefully guarded truth that Edgar and Colin had sought to twist into scandal, and demanding a reckoning that neither Eliza nor Nathaniel could any longer avoid. Nathaniel opened the letter in the study, his expression growing increasingly grim as he read through its contents. When he finished, he set it down upon his desk with visible restraint, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed the anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. It is from Lord Pemberton, he said, glancing toward Eliza, who had entered moments earlier at Mrs. Bell's urging. He hosts a gathering in 3 days, one of the largest of the season, and he writes to inform me that Edgar Whitlow intends to attend, along with Colin Vane. Pemberton suggests, quite pointedly, that I might wish to reconsider whether Miss Marlowe should accompany the household, given the delicate nature of circumstances. Eliza's stomach tightened at the news, understanding immediately the trap being constructed around her. They intend to confront us publicly, she said, in front of all society, where the damage to your reputation would prove impossible to contain. That is precisely their intention, Nathaniel confirmed, fury evident beneath his controlled tone. Edgar seeks to publicly humiliate you, force your removal from my household through sheer social pressure, while Colin no doubt hopes to capitalize on the resulting scandal to position himself as the reasonable alternative, offering his own attentions toward you once my protection has been sufficiently undermined. Then we must not give them the satisfaction of retreat, Eliza said, her earlier resolve hardening further at the confirmation of their scheme. If they intend to force a confrontation, let us meet it directly, rather than allow it to unfold entirely on their terms. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, something like fierce pride mixing with concern behind his gaze. You intend to attend, then, despite knowing what awaits us there? I intend to face them, Eliza confirmed, steadying her voice despite the fear still coiled tight within her chest. I have hidden and run and endured whispered judgment long enough. If Edgar wishes to expose his lies before all of society, then let him do so, and let me answer them directly, rather than allow his accusations to stand unchallenged in my absence. A slow, admiring smile spread across Nathaniel's features, the first genuine warmth she had seen from him in days. Your courage continues to astonish me, he said quietly. Very well, we will attend together, and we will face whatever they intend to unleash, side by side. Over the following 3 days, the household prepared carefully for the gathering, Lady Margaret insisting on selecting Eliza's gown personally, a deep sapphire blue that complemented her dark hair, and lent her an air of quiet dignity befitting the confrontation ahead. Nathaniel spent considerable time in his study, drafting careful responses to the rumors already circulating, gathering what evidence he could of Edgar's true character to counter whatever fabrications the man intended to present publicly. The night of the gathering arrived with a tension that settled heavily over the entire household. As their carriage approached Pemberton's grand estate, ablaze with light and already crowded with arriving guests, Eliza felt her earlier resolve wavering slightly beneath the weight of what awaited them inside. "Whatever happens tonight," Nathaniel said quietly, taking her hand gently within his own as the carriage came to a stop, "know that I stand beside you, regardless of what accusations Edgar or Colin choose to level against either of us. Your character needs no defense in my eyes. It has already proven itself beyond question." Eliza drew strength from his steady presence, from the warmth of his hand wrapped protectively around hers. "Then let us face them," she said, lifting her chin with determination as they stepped from the carriage into the bright, crowded evening ahead, ready at last to confront whatever truths and lies awaited them within. The ballroom stretched before them in a blaze of candlelight and color, filled with guests whose conversations quieted noticeably as Nathaniel and Eliza made their entrance. Whispers followed in their wake, curious glances tracking their movement through the crowd, though Eliza kept her chin lifted, refusing to let the scrutiny break her composure. She spotted Edgar first, standing near the refreshment table with a glass of wine in hand, his expression carrying the same false pleasantness he had worn during his visit to Ashford Manor weeks earlier. Beside him stood Colin Vane, engaged in quiet conversation, both men turning almost in unison as their gazes landed upon the new arrivals. "They have been waiting for us," Eliza murmured, her grip tightening slightly around Nathaniel's arm. "Then let us not disappoint them," Nathaniel replied, his voice steady despite the tension radiating through his frame. Lady Margaret, who had insisted on accompanying them despite her still recovering health, moved to Eliza's other side, offering silent solidarity as they crossed the room together. Lord Pemberton, their host, greeted them with careful diplomacy, clearly aware of the underlying tension his gathering had unwittingly become the stage for. "Ashford," he said, extending a hand in greeting. "I trust the evening finds you well, despite recent complications." "Complications born entirely of fabrication, Pemberton," Nathaniel replied evenly. "I trust you will find the truth considerably less scandalous than whatever rumors have reached your ears." Pemberton's expression flickered with interest, though he offered no further commentary, gesturing instead toward the gathered guests with practiced hospitality. As the evening progressed, Eliza remained acutely aware of Edgar and Vane watching from across the room, their patient calculation evident even from a distance, waiting for the precise moment to strike. She did not have long to wait. As the orchestra paused between sets and conversation filled the momentary quiet, Edgar Whitlow began making his way deliberately across the room toward them, his expression shifting into practiced concern, as heads turned to follow his approach. The confrontation both sides had been anticipating finally, inevitably, about to unfold before the assembled eyes of society. Edgar Whitlow crossed the ballroom floor with deliberate slowness, ensuring every eye in the room had turned to witness his approach before he finally came to a stop before Eliza and Nathaniel, his expression arranged into a mask of wounded concern that fooled no one who truly knew him. "Eliza," he said, his voice pitched to carry, "I had not expected to see you here this evening, given the circumstances. I do hope you have reconsidered returning home, where matters between us might be properly resolved, away from the discomfort your presence clearly causes His Grace's standing." Murmurs rippled through the nearby guests, curious attention sharpening as they sensed the confrontation building before them. Eliza felt her heart pounding, but she held her ground, refusing to let fear overtake the resolve she had spent weeks building. "There is nothing to resolve between us, Edgar," she replied clearly, her voice carrying enough for those nearby to hear without difficulty. "I left your household because you gave me no other choice, and I have found safety and purpose here that you never once offered me." Edgar's mask flickered, irritation bleeding through his careful performance. "You wound me with such accusations, my dear, especially before company. I have only ever sought your welfare, despite the difficulties of your temperament since your mother's passing." "My temperament," Eliza repeated, anger sharpening her tone despite her effort at composure. "You mean my refusal to remain silent while you controlled every aspect of my life, took what belonged to my mother, and struck me whenever I dared question your authority." A collective gasp rippled through the surrounding guests at her direct accusation, spoken clearly enough that none could mistake her meaning. Edgar's expression darkened, the pretense of concern abandoned entirely, as fury flashed behind his eyes. "You dare make such claims publicly," he hissed, stepping closer, "without a shred of evidence to support them." "Evidence enough exists," came an unexpected voice from nearby, and Eliza turned to see Mrs. Bell standing close, having accompanied the household that evening at Lady Margaret's insistence, along with 2 other servants from Ashford Manor. The physician who examined Miss Marlowe upon her arrival at Ashford Manor documented bruising consistent with her account, months before this dispute arose. His records remain available should any magistrate require them. Edgar's face paled slightly at this unexpected corroboration, though he attempted to recover his composure. "Medical opinion proves nothing regarding the cause of any injury," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Perhaps not on its own," Nathaniel interjected, his voice cold and controlled as he stepped forward to stand directly before Edgar. "But combined with your own attempt to fabricate accusations of theft against her, threats you made quite clearly before witnesses within my own household, I believe the pattern becomes rather difficult to dismiss as coincidence." Colin Vane, who had been watching the confrontation unfold from a short distance with visible satisfaction, suddenly found the attention shifting uncomfortably toward himself, as several guests began murmuring questions about his own role in spreading the rumors now being so publicly challenged. "I merely repeated what I understood to be reliable information," Vane said quickly, attempting to distance himself from the mounting scrutiny. "I bear no responsibility for whatever falsehoods Whitlow may have originated." "You repeated them with considerable enthusiasm, Colin," Nathaniel replied, turning his attention now toward Vane with the same cold precision, embellishing them further at every opportunity, hoping to force circumstances that might serve your own ambitions regarding Miss Marlowe. "Do not imagine your involvement has gone unnoticed." The color drained from Vane's face as the surrounding guests began exchanging pointed glances, understanding dawning across the assembled crowd regarding the true nature of the scheme that had been unfolding around them. Whatever calculated advantage Vane had hoped to gain through spreading gossip now crumbled visibly beneath the weight of public exposure. Lord Pemberton, sensing the shifting tide of the room, stepped forward with the authority befitting his position as host. "I believe," he said firmly, "that this gathering has borne witness to quite enough scandal for one evening, though I confess it appears the scandal belongs to considerably different parties than initial rumor suggested." Edgar, recognizing the crowd's sympathy shifting decisively away from him, made one final, desperate attempt to salvage his position. "This is absurd," he snapped, his composure finally shattering entirely. "She is an ungrateful, deceitful girl who has clearly manipulated all of you, just as she manipulated the Duke into offering her shelter and now his misplaced affection." "Enough," Nathaniel said, his voice cutting through the ballroom with unmistakable authority, silencing every conversation still lingering around them. "I have heard enough of your lies for one evening, Whitlow, and I suspect everyone present has as well. Eliza Marlowe is the bravest, most honest person I have had the privilege of knowing, and I will not stand by while you continue attempting to destroy her character through fabrication and cruelty." He turned then, fully facing Eliza, his expression softening from the fury he had directed at Edgar into something far warmer, far more vulnerable than she had ever witnessed from him before, even in their most private conversations. "I have hesitated to speak fully of my feelings," he continued, his voice quieter now though still carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom, concerned that circumstances, timing, or my own uncertainty might complicate what I have come to understand as truth. But I will hesitate no longer. From the moment I found you upon my doorstep, disheveled and unafraid despite everything you had endured, you have shown a strength and honesty that has changed me irrevocably. I do not care what rumors circulate, what scandal Edgar or Colin attempt to manufacture. I care only that you know, before all of society if necessary, that my regard for you runs far deeper than mere protection or charity." Eliza's breath caught, tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, as the weight of his public declaration settled over her, the vulnerability he had offered before an entire room of curious onlookers. "Nathaniel," she whispered, his given name slipping from her lips for the first time. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying absolute certainty despite the audience surrounding them. "I have for weeks now, though I lacked the courage to speak it plainly, until this moment demanded nothing less than complete honesty." The ballroom had fallen entirely silent now, every guest watching the unfolding declaration with rapt attention, Edgar and Colin's earlier scheme utterly forgotten beneath the weight of a confession far more compelling than any scandal they had hoped to manufacture. Eliza felt every fear that had haunted her since that stormy night finally dissolve beneath the sincerity in Nathaniel's expression, the certainty in his voice. She had come to this ballroom prepared to defend herself against lies and manipulation, never anticipating she would instead find herself standing at the center of a declaration that changed everything. "I love you as well," she said, her voice steady despite the tears now falling freely down her cheeks. "I have felt it growing within me for weeks, though I feared voicing it might shatter whatever fragile safety I had found within your household." "There is nothing fragile about what exists between us," Nathaniel replied, reaching for her hand and lifting it gently to his lips. "Whatever storms we have weathered, whatever threats yet remain, I intend to face them all beside you, for as long as you will have me." The surrounding guests erupted into a mixture of astonished murmurs and, gradually, warm applause, the earlier tension of scandal transforming entirely into celebration of the unexpected romance that had unfolded before them. Edgar, recognizing the complete collapse of his scheme, retreated from the ballroom without another word, his threats rendered powerless against the genuine truth now witnessed by all present. Colin Vane followed shortly after, his ambitions thoroughly exposed and his standing among society's circles irreparably damaged by his own calculated cruelty. Lady Margaret watched the scene unfold with unmistakable satisfaction, dabbing carefully at her own eyes despite her usual composure. "It took them long enough," she murmured to Mrs. Bell, though warmth colored every word of her complaint. In the weeks that followed, whatever remained of the scandal Edgar and Colin had attempted to construct crumbled entirely beneath the weight of public knowledge regarding their true characters. Society, ever quick to shift its judgment, now regarded Eliza with newfound respect, her courage in facing her accusers publicly transforming her, from subject of gossip, into figure of admiration among those who valued honesty over calculated cruelty. Nathaniel formalized his intentions properly soon after, requesting Eliza's hand in marriage during a quiet evening in the very library where their friendship had first deepened into something far more profound. Lady Margaret, fully recovered and characteristically unable to resist offering her opinion, declared the match the finest decision her nephew had made in years, insisting on overseeing preparations for their wedding with the same sharp attention to detail she applied to everything else within her purview. Their wedding took place on a bright spring morning months later, the storm that had first brought them together now nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by clear skies and the quiet certainty of a future built upon honesty rather than desperation. Eliza stood before the assembled guests, no longer disheveled or afraid, but radiant and unafraid, exactly as Nathaniel had first recognized her that stormy night, exactly as she had remained through every trial that followed. As they exchanged their vows, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from fleeing through rain and darkness with nothing but fear driving her forward, to standing now before the man who had shown her what it meant to be truly seen, truly valued, without condition or expectation. As she thought of her mother, of the locket resting once again safely against her collarbone, and felt certain that wherever her mother's spirit rested, she would be proud of the strength her daughter had found, the love she had claimed despite every obstacle placed before her. Nathaniel, watching his bride with open adoration as their vows concluded, understood now with complete certainty that the walls he had built around his heart following his own painful betrayal had never truly been meant to remain permanent. They had simply been waiting, all along, for someone brave enough, honest enough, unafraid enough, to prove that genuine connection remained possible despite every reason he had once found to doubt it. Their life together began not with grand declarations or elaborate ceremony, but with the same quiet honesty that had first drawn them together, a foundation far sturdier than status or convenience could ever provide. Whatever challenges the future held, they faced them now as partners, equals bound not by circumstance or desperation, but by a love that had proven itself capable of weathering scandal, threat, and doubt, emerging stronger for every trial it had endured. And though the storm that first brought Eliza to Nathaniel's doorstep had long since passed, its memory remained precious to them both, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most enduring happiness, and that courage shown in our darkest moments can illuminate a path toward a future brighter than we ever dared imagine possible. In the days immediately following the gathering at Pemberton's estate, word of Edgar Whitlow's public humiliation spread rapidly through society, reaching ears far beyond the ballroom where his schemes had so thoroughly unraveled. Nathaniel, unwilling to let the matter rest simply because Edgar had retreated in disgrace, pursued the physician's documented evidence further, presenting it formally before a local magistrate along with testimony from Mrs. Bell and others within the household who had witnessed Edgar's threats firsthand. The proceedings that followed were brief but decisive. Faced with credible evidence of his conduct, including the fabricated theft accusations he had attempted to level against Eliza, Edgar found himself stripped of whatever remaining credibility he had clung to within their community. He departed the county entirely within weeks, his reputation in ruins, seeking whatever fresh start remained available to a man whose cruelty had finally caught up with him. Eliza felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only quiet relief that his shadow, at last, no longer loomed over her future. Colin Vane fared little better in the aftermath. Stripped of the social standing he had spent years carefully cultivating, his ambitions for advantageous marriage evaporated, as families who might once have considered his suit now regarded him with open suspicion. He retreated from society's more prominent circles, his name becoming for a time synonymous with the very scandal he had hoped to manufacture against someone else entirely. Eliza, meanwhile, found herself embraced by a society that had initially regarded her with such wary curiosity. Invitations began arriving at Ashford Manor once more, though now they came paired with genuine warmth rather than cautious obligation. Ladies who had once whispered behind gloved hands now sought her company directly, admiring the quiet strength she had displayed in facing her accusers so openly. Eliza accepted this shift with grace, though she remained, at heart, the same thoughtful, resilient woman who had stumbled through Nathaniel's gates months earlier, never allowing newfound social favor to alter the values that had carried her through far darker circumstances. Lady Margaret's health continued its steady improvement throughout these months, her recovery seeming to accelerate alongside the happiness blossoming between her nephew and the young woman she had come to regard as the daughter she never had. She took particular delight in overseeing wedding preparations, her sharp opinions on everything from flower arrangements to guest lists providing a constant, familiar presence throughout the planning that filled the household with warmth and anticipation in equal measure. "You will wear my mother's pearls," Lady Margaret declared one afternoon, presenting Eliza with an elegant strand of lustrous pearls that had clearly been treasured for generations. "They belong to this family now, and you are as much a part of it as anyone who shares our blood." Eliza accepted the gift with tears gathering in her eyes, overwhelmed by the acceptance and love this family had shown her, so different from the coldness and control she had known within Edgar's household. "Thank you," she managed, embracing the older woman carefully, "for everything. For seeing something in me worth defending, even when I struggled to see it myself." "Nonsense," Lady Margaret replied, though warmth softened her usual brusque tone considerably. "I simply recognized what my nephew saw from the very beginning. It merely took the rest of us a little longer to catch up." As the wedding day finally arrived, Ashford Manor transformed into a scene of quiet elegance. The gardens where Eliza had spent so many hours with Lady Margaret, now adorned with early spring blooms, the same grounds where she had once collapsed in desperate exhaustion, now serving as the backdrop for the happiest day of her life. Guests gathered beneath a clear sky, the storm clouds of scandal and threat that had once darkened her path now entirely dispersed, replaced by nothing but warmth and celebration. Eliza walked the short distance from the manor toward the small chapel on the grounds, dressed in a gown of ivory silk that Lady Margaret had insisted upon commissioning specifically for the occasion. Lady Margaret's pearls resting elegantly against her collarbone alongside the locket she had carried through that first desperate night, a symbol of everything she had survived to reach this moment. Nathaniel waited for her at the chapel entrance, his expression carrying none of the guarded composure she remembered from their first meeting, replaced entirely by open, unguarded joy that took her breath away as she approached. Whatever walls he had once built around his heart following years of betrayal and disappointment had long since crumbled entirely, dismantled not through force or persuasion, but through the simple, steady honesty she had offered him from the very beginning. "You are certain," he murmured as she reached his side, a familiar teasing warmth entering his tone despite the solemnity of the occasion, "that you wish to bind yourself permanently to a man once considered the coldest, most reclusive figure in the county?" "I have never been more certain of anything," Eliza replied, love and happiness evident in every word. That reclusive, cold figure opened his door to a stranger in the middle of a storm, when every reasonable instinct might have suggested otherwise. "I fell in love with the man beneath that reputation long before society ever glimpsed what I already knew to be true." Their ceremony proceeded with quiet joy, vows exchanged before family and friends who had witnessed the full journey of their unlikely love, from scandal and threat to genuine hard-won happiness. As Nathaniel finally kissed his bride before the assembled guests, applause and cheers erupting throughout the small chapel, Eliza felt the last remnants of fear and uncertainty that had once defined her existence dissolve entirely, replaced by a future she could finally, fully embrace without hesitation or doubt. Autumn arrived at Ashford Manor with a gentle golden light that Eliza had grown to love over the years since her wedding. The grounds she once fled toward in desperation, now the place she called home in every sense that mattered. She stood near the same tall windows where Nathaniel had first watched the storm on the night she arrived, though now she watched instead the peaceful turning of leaves across the estate she had come to know so intimately. Much had changed within their household over the months since their marriage, though the foundation of honesty and quiet strength that had first drawn them together remained steady beneath every new development. Lady Margaret had continued to thrive, her health stronger now than it had been in years, her sharp wit undiminished as she took great satisfaction in what she often referred to, with evident pride, as her role in orchestrating the happiest match the county had witnessed in a generation. Eliza had taken to her new position as Duchess with a thoughtfulness that surprised those who had once doubted her suitability for such standing. Rather than distancing herself from the household staff who had shown her such kindness during her recovery, she maintained close relationships with Mrs. Bell and the others, ensuring the manor remained a place of genuine warmth rather than cold formality. She established, with Nathaniel's full support, a modest fund to assist women in the surrounding villages who found themselves in circumstances similar to those she had once endured, offering shelter and resources to those who might otherwise have nowhere to turn. "You continue finding new ways to surprise me," Nathaniel remarked one evening, finding her reviewing correspondence related to the fund within his study, candlelight casting warm shadows across her focused expression. "I confess, I did not anticipate marrying a woman who would transform my household into something of a sanctuary for those in need." "I could hardly forget what it meant to have nowhere to turn," Eliza replied, glancing up with a soft smile. "If our circumstances allow us to offer that same refuge to others, I cannot imagine using our position for anything less meaningful." Nathaniel crossed the room to join her, settling into the chair beside her desk with the easy familiarity that had grown between them over months of shared life. "My father, whatever his faults, always spoke of using privilege in service of others rather than mere personal comfort," he said thoughtfully. "I believe he would have approved of what you have built here, perhaps more than he approved of much else during his own lifetime." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Lady Margaret's voice calling from the corridor, her tone carrying its familiar blend of exasperation and affection, as she made her way toward the study. "If you two intend to spend every evening secluded away with correspondence and quiet conversation, I shall have to remind you both that you have guests arriving for dinner within the hour, and I refuse to entertain Lord and Lady Pemberton alone, while you remain absorbed in each other's company." Eliza exchanged an amused glance with Nathaniel before rising to prepare for the evening ahead, the easy rhythm of their life together now so thoroughly established that even Lady Margaret's interruptions carried more affection than genuine complaint. Dinner that evening passed pleasantly, filled with conversation and laughter that would have seemed impossible to imagine during those anxious weeks when scandal had threatened to unravel everything Eliza had worked to build. Lord Pemberton, ever gracious, raised his glass toward the couple partway through the meal, his expression warm with genuine admiration. "I must say, Ashford, your household has become quite the model of happiness within our circle. Whatever doubts some may have harbored regarding your match have long since been thoroughly dispelled." "Doubts born of misunderstanding rarely survive genuine acquaintance," Nathaniel replied, reaching for Eliza's hand beneath the table with quiet affection. "I have found, in my wife, a partner whose character exceeds anything I once believed possible to find within the confines of society's expectations." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment settling deep within her heart. She thought sometimes, in quiet reflective moments, of the frightened girl who had collapsed upon these very steps months earlier, uncertain whether she would survive the storm chasing her, let alone find happiness beyond anything she had dared imagine possible. That girl remained part of her still. She understood now, the resilience and courage forged through hardship never entirely fading even as circumstances improved beyond recognition. But she had grown beyond mere survival into something far richer, a woman capable of building genuine connection, of extending compassion toward others who faced similar struggles, of standing firm against those who sought to diminish or control her. As the evening drew to its close and their guests departed into the crisp autumn night, Eliza found herself once more standing beside Nathaniel near the entrance where their story had first begun. The same stone steps where she had collapsed in desperate exhaustion, now simply the threshold of a home she loved completely. "Do you ever think of that night?" she asked quietly, watching the darkness settle over the grounds beyond the manor's warm light. "The storm that brought me here." Nathaniel's arms settled around her shoulders, drawing her close against the evening chill. "Often," he admitted, "though I no longer think of it with the uncertainty I once felt, watching a stranger collapse upon my steps without knowing what her presence would come to mean. I think of it now with nothing but gratitude, that fate, or chance, or whatever force guided you toward my gates that night, saw fit to bring us together, despite every reason circumstance might have offered to keep us apart." Eliza leaned into his embrace, drawing comfort from the steady warmth of his presence. so different from the fear and desperation that had once defined her existence. "I think of it the same way," she said softly. "That storm took everything familiar from me, forced me into darkness and uncertainty I could not have anticipated surviving. But it also led me here, to you, to a life I could never have imagined possible during those years beneath Edgar's roof." They stood together in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching stars begin to emerge across the clearing sky, the same sky that had once poured relentless rain down upon a desperate, disheveled young woman fleeing through darkness toward an uncertain future. That future had arrived now, transformed entirely from what fear might have once predicted, built instead upon courage, honesty, and a love that had proven itself capable of weathering every storm thrown against it. "Whatever challenges still await us," Nathaniel said finally, pressing a gentle kiss against her temple, "I find myself unafraid to face them, as long as you remain beside me." "Always," Eliza replied, certainty and contentment settling deep within her heart. "Through every storm yet to come, I intend to remain exactly where I belong, beside you, unafraid, for the rest of our lives together." As they turned finally to make their way back inside, leaving the quiet autumn evening behind them, the manor glowed warmly against the darkness, a beacon of the home they had built together, from circumstances that once seemed destined only for hardship and sorrow. The storm that had first brought them together had long since passed, but its legacy remained woven permanently into the foundation of their life, a reminder that even the darkest nights sometimes lead toward the brightest, most enduring happiness imaginable, waiting patiently to be claimed by those brave enough to face the darkness unafraid. Spring returned once more to Ashford Manor the following year, bringing with it news that filled the household with fresh joy. Eliza discovered she was carrying their first child, a revelation that transformed Nathaniel's usual composed demeanor into something closer to overwhelmed delight the moment she shared the news within the privacy of their chambers. "A child," he repeated, wonder evident in his voice as he knelt before her, resting his hand gently against her still flat abdomen with careful reverence. "Our child." "You seem more astonished than I anticipated," Eliza teased gently, though her own happiness matched his completely. "I simply never imagined such happiness could belong to me," Nathaniel admitted, rising to draw her into a careful embrace. "For so many years I convinced myself that solitude was the safest path, that connection only invited eventual betrayal. You have taught me otherwise, in every possible way, and now you offer me this as well, a family I never dared hope to build." Lady Margaret received the news with characteristic enthusiasm disguised beneath practical commentary regarding nursery preparations and proper care during confinement, though the tears gathering in her eyes betrayed the depth of her genuine joy. "Finally," she declared, "this house shall know the sound of children's laughter once more. It has been far too quiet these past years." The months that followed passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation, Eliza's charitable work continuing alongside the growing responsibilities of her condition. The fund she had established now providing shelter and support to several women who had found themselves in circumstances not unlike her own years earlier. She took particular satisfaction in personally welcoming each woman who sought assistance, offering not just practical resources but the same understanding and compassion she herself had once received when she needed it most. One afternoon, while reviewing correspondence related to the fund, Eliza received an unexpected letter that gave her pause. It came from a solicitor representing Edgar Whitlow, informing her that her former stepfather had passed away in a distant county, his final years apparently marked by considerable financial hardship and isolation following his disgrace. The letter noted that he had left behind no estate of consequence, having exhausted whatever resources remained to him long before his death. Eliza sat with the news for a long while, uncertain exactly what she felt upon learning of Edgar's passing. Not grief, certainly, given everything he had inflicted upon her throughout her childhood and the cruel schemes he had attempted against her happiness. But neither did she feel the satisfaction she might once have anticipated, only a quiet, complicated acknowledgement that whatever chapter of her life he represented had finally, truly closed. She shared the news with Nathaniel that evening, watching his expression carefully for his reaction. "I feel strange," she admitted, uncertain what response such news deserves. "You owe him no particular response at all," Nathaniel said gently, drawing her close. "He caused you tremendous harm, and his passing changes nothing of what you endured, or what you have since built despite it. You are free to feel whatever you feel, without obligation toward grief he never earned from you." Eliza nodded, grateful for his understanding, and allowed herself simply to release whatever lingering weight Edgar's memory had continued to carry within her heart. Their child would grow up knowing nothing of that man's cruelty, she resolved, raised instead within a household built upon love, honesty, and the quiet strength she and Nathaniel had forged together through every trial they had faced. Their daughter arrived on a warm summer morning several months later, her cries filling Ashford Manor with the very sound Lady Margaret had so eagerly anticipated. They named her Margaret, in honor of the aunt who had welcomed Eliza so fiercely into their family from the very beginning, and watched with overwhelming love as Lady Margaret held her tiny namesake for the first time, tears flowing freely down cheeks unashamed of such open display of emotion. "She has your strength already," Lady Margaret observed, studying the infant's determined expression as she settled into her great-aunt's arms. "I can see it plainly." Eliza, exhausted but radiant, exchanged a glance with Nathaniel that carried the full weight of everything they had built together, from that storm-swept night of desperate flight to this moment of complete, hard-won happiness. Whatever trials still awaited them in the years ahead, she understood now with unshakable certainty that they would face them exactly as they had faced every challenge before, together, unafraid, bound by a love that had proven itself capable of transforming even the darkest storm into the foundation for a lifetime of joy.